today about executive functioning and the theory of mind. So one of the first things I thought we could talk about was mind blindness, and I know you've got a lot of knowledge in this area.
Yeah, so when I know today that we're talking about differences that an autistic person or someone with a neurodevelopmental difference, the way that they might perceive the world and the differences that they might have in making sense of the world and understanding the world. And the first point that we'll talk about is mind blindness. And when we say that word, we mean theory of mind. And by that, we mean putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and others automatically knowing what is in your head. So again, I would just like to put the clause out there that not all autistic people will have difficulties with this, and some autistic people may be absolutely fantastic at this. However, there are some autistic young people and adults who struggle with putting themselves into other people's shoes, whereas it might come quite naturally for someone who isn't on the spectrum and has a neurodiversity. It can be quite a challenge for a young person to understand what someone else is experiencing, how they might be thinking and feeling. And as you can imagine, in a world at school where it's very busy and there's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of different young people, and there's a lot of things going on. You may have different teachers, supply teachers. In secondary school, you move from class to class. That inability sometimes to put themselves into someone else's shoes and maybe think how that person may be feeling can really negatively impact their connections that they make with one another.
Yeah.
So
sometimes our young people don't have empathy, or they don't have feelings. It can be difficult for them, but it doesn't mean that it's not there at all.
Exactly. And I think that's what we've got to try to remember, that all autistic people are completely different. And while some may struggle with understanding emotions and putting themselves in other people's shoes, doesn't mean that everyone does. But you can just imagine how hard that might be for someone. It can seem quite easy for us to know that if someone's crying, we assume that they are upset. But when you actually look at that emotion of crying, some people cry because they're happy. Some people cry because they're overwhelmed. Some people cry because they're angry, they're sad. There's loads of emotions that can go with you seeing tears on someone's face. So when you are an autistic person who's trying to pick up and trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes and trying to imagine what they're experiencing through a situation, it can be really hard with those connections and making friendships and relationships with people around you. And it can often mean that some of our young people feel quite isolated at school.
I heard that executive functioning covers lots of other aspects as well. So can you tell me a little bit more about those?
Yeah, so executive functioning and making connections with one another is around internally linking your past experiences from here and now and looking at planning and organising and sequencing and remembering. So if you think about it, a lot of our young people can find it hard to remember what has happened and then change and put something else into practice. For example, you touch a hot pan, you then remember next time not to touch that pan because you might get burnt. That is your executive functioning, remembering that previously you did something and the here and now is now needs to change and you need to display a different kind of behaviour. The problem is that some of our young people can struggle with that executive functioning, so they might not learn from their mistakes. And they might find it hard to change their behaviour without a lot of support. You get a lot of adults who will say, oh, we'll leave them, they'll only do it once, they'll only fall over once, they'll only climb too high once, they'll learn when they hurt themselves that not to do it again. But actually some of our autistic young people and adults really struggle to take an experience and then kind of learn upon that and help it change their behaviour for the next time. And that could be quite a difficulty. And also your executive functioning affects your ability to organise, sequence, prioritise, manage, time efficiency. things like that, it can be really difficult. And some of our autistic young people and adults have said to us, it's just that getting and going, that starting part of an activity where you go from sitting here doing nothing to doing the activity that you're meant to be doing. It's that in-between transition gap that they can struggle with. Things like homework, prepping for exams, remembering that they need to read a book, or thinking, right, I've got homework due on Friday and I've got homework due on Monday. Which one do I prioritise on a Sunday evening? Some, people who have got good time management will understand that they should prioritise one on Monday. However, some autistic people might really, really like the activity that's due on Friday. So actually, they'll prioritise that one because it's their interest, rather than prioritising correctly in terms of organising your time and ensuring that all the tasks are done on time. So it can be quite difficult when it comes to things like SATs, but it can also be hard on a daily basis when you're in a classroom and you're given multiple tasks to do, or if you're asked to do something by a teacher and you're not sure, you're not given directions around, this is your first task, this is your second task. It can be quite hard to organise that. But things like organising impacts so much of our life. Organising what we are wearing, organising what we are eating, thinking about our packed lunch, making sure that when we leave the house, we've got our bag, we've got our coat, we've got our PE kit, we've got our cooking, and all of that stuff. If you think about it, there's a lot of stuff that need organising on a daily basis, and that you forget about the things in the bedroom, that the clothes need organising, that the room needs organising, needs tidying. Forget about that, because if you just think about their school life, that's so much that needs organising, and it can be really difficult, and time management can also be really challenging for some of our young people. And it's not to say that they can't tell the time, because they can. It can be understanding when to get started, how long that's going to take, and when it will finish. So again, it's about organising that time and planning and sequencing, and also remembering. So as part of your executive functioning, that part of your brain, it's also about remembering things and what's coming next and what's happened. So if you can imagine a young person is struggling to remember what's coming next, that must be really anxiety provoking for them.
I think that's why
or if they continue.
Sorry, April, go on.
I was just going to say, if they're continuously forgetting the homework, or if they're continuously forgetting their pens, or continuously forgetting to do a task that has been asked of them, even from moment to moment. So a teacher could literally stand beside them and say, here's your task, can you complete it? They could then get distracted by something else because it's so overwhelming in the classroom and there's so many sensory things going on, and someone's talking and someone's asking them a question, and then could forget what they've been asked to do. And that can come across sometimes as a lack of want to engage, or refusal of work, or kind of not being respectful of adults, or not being respectful of the boundaries within school or at home. But actually, it's that they've got a core difficulty with their executive functioning.
I think that's why it's really important that we have visual timetables for our young people and planners, because it really helps them to be able to order and sequence. And sometimes I know when we support our families, we have to even break brushing their teeth down into really small tasks and really small step-by-step instructions in our visuals that we create, don't we?
Yeah, sometimes it's not as simple as just putting a picture with some words. For example, if you are wanting someone to do the homework, you could create a simple visual, and it could be tea, and then it could be homework, and then it could be iPad time or Xbox or whatever they like to do. But actually, the homework needs to be broken down. So how should they be doing their homework? They need to maybe get a pen and paper. They need to get that homework activity. They need to read it. Then they need to write the answer. Then maybe they need to spell check it. And as you're getting older and you're SATs and you're looking at your revision, how do you revise? It's around a really quite precise step by step around reading your notes, looking at videos, looking at other ways of learning. Sometimes it's not just as easy as a simple visual, but then sometimes it is. And sometimes a simple visual is just that visual trigger, and it's just enough to remind them what to do, and they can get on with it. So just kind of listen to the young person and where they are and what stage they're at, and go with them, really.
Yeah. I know when I've worked in schools previously, for some of the young people that I've supported, we've actually had to place dots on the page so that they know where the date has to go, they know where the title has to go, they have to be prompted that it needs to be underlined. And then another dot to indicate where their first sentence is written and started. And the other great thing that I've used in skills before is task boards. So we create a 3-step task board so that the young person knows that perhaps in their writing they've got task 1 and it needs to be a sentence about whatever book they're studying on that particular day. And then once they've completed that, they can put a little tick on it to say that it's done. And we generally use 3 steps and then offer a movement break, which is really useful because that gives them that regulation to be able to focus and come back and perhaps look at task 2. It is a really useful tool.
And there's loads of activities that you can do, like plan backwards, execute forwards. So it's all about starting at the end of an activity and then working your way backwards, like backwards chaining. So, for example, if you're wanting a child to put their coat on and maybe they're struggling, as the supporting adult, you would put the coat on, you'd put the zip in, you'd do it all up and you'd let them finish the end of it, and you would work your way backwards. So they're learning and they're always getting that result at the end of it, instead of always feeling like they've failed and like they've never done enough. So backwards chaining and going from the end of an activity to the beginning again. Like you say, good visuals, loads of gestures, and kind of being really directive, and kind of, you know, pointing to things and making sure that they're aware and that they're listening. Again, not forcing eye contact, but just making sure that the young person is aware of what's going around them and that you've got their attention before you giving them their steps by steps. At Daisy Chain, we do something called Steps to Success. So you put your end goal at the top, and then you look at those little building blocks and those little steps that you need to do to get to the end of that. And again, that can break it down. And sometimes you can break an activity down like that, like getting ready for school in the morning. You can break that down in little steps to success, because I think sometimes what we don't appreciate is how much effort and how much energy it can take for a young person to get ready for school and to actually leave the house. And that sometimes the biggest battle is getting them into school.
That's right.
You know, yeah, and it's that, and again, it's planning, it's that executive function, it's that getting up and going, it's that organising and sequencing. Quite often we'll get parents who say, you know, they just don't want to get ready for school, they're too busy watching their games, and then they don't like being late. But again, it's because they are struggling to understand a sequence of events, and how them wanting to kind of do their favourite activity right now is going to negatively impact future events and activities. And again, it's that executive function, and it can be a bit difficult for them.
Yeah.
I think we can talk a little bit about central coherence as well, which is the focus on detail, because I feel like when an autistic person is struggling to make sense of the world and is having a difference to someone else and making sense of that world, it is quite focused around their theory of mind and their inability to kind of understand and communicate what's going on in their head. And then that focus on detail, which is that central coherence, and then that making connections and that executive functioning. So when we're talking about central coherence, we're talking about the inability sometimes to, what we would say, see the wood for the trees, you know, see the bigger picture. Because some of our young people can focus so much on the small picture. They can focus so much on that date on the page that they then can't start their work. Or they can focus so much on the fact that their shoelace feels a bit different and it's tied a bit too tight, that they then can't go and have their lunch because they're struggling to walk with that shoe on. Or actually, you might not even be able to leave the door because the way that mum's done her daughter's hair, it's too tight, and they're focused so wholly on that feeling that they're struggling to see that actually it's going to affect the whole day and they're not going to get into school in time. So I think sometimes that central coherence and small things that might seem insignificant can be rather significant to them. So if you have got a young person in your class that seems to be focusing on something that you think is really small, just have a little bit of a think as to whether this is their central coherence, and that maybe actually they need some support to see the bigger picture. Yeah, so when a young person's in your class and they're struggling with their theory of mind, and maybe they're struggling to understand that you don't know what's in their mind, it can be a bit of a communication gap, because they can automatically think that you know what is going on in their head. So we often get young people and parents who come to Daisy Chain and say, my son's not really communicating with me and he's just standing at the cupboard and he's just looking at the cupboard. And it could actually be that their theory of mind isn't kicking in, and that that young person thinks that looking at the cupboard, in his mind he's saying, I would like a packet of crisps, I really want crisps. So he's just not communicating that, because they can struggle to understand that what's in their mind isn't also what's in other people's minds. So if they are having a really difficult time at school, they might not communicate that verbally, because they might think that you know what they're thinking. We've had some young people at Daisy Chain who have been really, really scared that they told a lie and that the police were going to come and tell them off, because the police must know that they lied. And they didn't understand that actually the police didn't know that they lied, because they don't even know who they are, but they just automatically assume that because they knew that in their mind, that that's what everyone else knew. So it can be a massive communication barrier. So if you put all of those together, if you put mind blindness, focus on detail, making connections, as you can imagine, this causes a lot of anxiety with our young people. And finding and making sense of the world can be really difficult for some people on the spectrum. And I think sometimes focusing on the seemingly insignificant details and struggling to read other people's minds can get you in a very muddled situation when you're at school or when you're out with others. And then that is what drives that fear of change and that desire for sameness. And actually, if you are looking at a young person who has got anxiety, or that are kind of doing behaviours and are displaying behaviours to cope at school, or they're resisting change and you're not really sure why, and they've got a lot of anxiety, please look at their social world, and if they are struggling to make sense of that, and if they're finding it a little bit hard, and if they are struggling with the sensory differences and their difficulties within the classroom, if they are struggling to move past what might look like a really insignificant detail to you, but actually to them it's a really difficult situation, and that are they struggling to communicate with their parents, with their friends, with teachers, because they are struggling with reading other people's minds, and it's getting all a bit muddled, and it can be a little bit confusing for them.